All right, more fighting in the Gaza Strip, of course, and both sides are blaming one another. Let's give you the latest numbers. 175 Palestinians have been killed so far since Tuesday. Over 1,060 wounded. And the number of Israelis killed is 0. And so, of course, I'm told that that is even-handed and the same for everybody. But no, it's okay, because the Palestinians are the terrorists, and they kill civilians. That's why it makes a big difference. In fact, you know what? Let's go to Prime Minister Netanyahu. He's going to educate us on all this, and then I'll come back and give you the real numbers on civilian dead. Let's go to first clip here.
We can't enable our population to be under continuous rocket fire. I mean, I just want your viewers to imagine the United States being bombarded, not in one city or 2 cities, but in every city between New York and Colorado. Maybe 20% of the United States would be exempt from this. 80% of your citizens would have to be in bomb shelters or ready to go into bomb shelters within a minute to a minute and a half max. You can't, no country can accept that. We can't accept that, and we'll take the necessary action to stop it.
There seems to be very little disagreement about that here in this country, Mr. Prime Minister.
Well, that part is true, unfortunately. Now, Netanyahu says no country can accept that. Imagine if you had to worry about rockets from 80% of your country, New York to Colorado. All right, well, let's flip it. Imagine if 80% of your country, or maybe 100% of your country, was occupied. Can any country accept that? Would Texas accept that? Would Colorado accept that? Would Rhode Island accept? Would Florida accept? Would Mississippi and Alabama, would they accept that? Would South Carolina, North Carolina, all those states in between, Pennsylvania, you name it, would they all bow their heads and say, well, we're under an occupation. Obviously, we're not allowed to fight back, and so we bow our heads. We bow our heads. You would, I mean, of course, right? So why don't we just go occupy Texas right now? Because that's perfectly acceptable. The occupied territories have been occupied for 47 years. No, but that's acceptable. Okay. So, but Prime Minister Netanyahu is going to continue and tell you the difference between the Israelis and the Palestinians. They're the bad guys. We're the good guys. Let's explain.
People, I think, are wondering whether you're nearer the beginning of this offensive or near the end of it. Can you give us an assessment of that?
Well, whether we're at the beginning of the end or the end of the beginning, I'm not going to tell you that right now, because we face a very, very brutal terrorist enemy. I mean, you know, here's the difference between us. We're using missile defense to protect our civilians, and they're using their civilians to protect their missiles. That's basically the difference.
No, that's the difference. They use civilians to protect their missiles, yeah. See, they target civilians, whereas Israel kills a lot of civilians by accident. 77% of the Palestinians killed in these round of attacks were civilians. That seems to be a high error rate. Now, we've had 1,300 Israeli airstrikes. We've also had 1,000 Palestinian rockets. I'm going to show you the difference in the rockets in the pictures in a second, okay? So both sides firing rockets. One side's rockets are clearly more lethal than the other and more accurate, etc. Now, do I think that Hamas should be firing rockets? Absolutely not. It's a terrible idea. It's a bad idea morally, ethically, and politically. Look, are you willing to die for your cause? Gandhi was willing to die for his cause. Mandela was willing to die for his cause. King was, okay? But these guys had an effective strategy. They didn't punch. It doesn't take courage to throw a punch. It takes courage to take a punch. So I believe the Palestinians should go in that direction. But meanwhile, when the Israelis say, what, us kill civilians? Golly gee, did 77% of our bombs land on top of civilian heads? Well, that was just a mistake. They intended it. We didn't intend it. My God, you must be the most inefficient, incompetent administration in world history. That 77% of the time you just wind up hitting people you didn't want to hit at all. Maybe your technology isn't that good. They say that Palestinians are hiding behind their civilians. They're firing rockets from the Gaza Strip. So let's think this through for a second, because this is one of the dumbest talking points, and it's said over and over on American television, and everybody accepts it as gospel. So Israel believes that Hamas, who I don't think should be firing rockets, if they're going to fire rockets, should go in the middle of the desert and go, here I am, Israel, here I am. I'm going to fire this rocket here from the open area, okay? All right, here we go. I fired it. Yeah, that would make it easier for Israel to get them, all right? Gaza is one of the most densely populated places in the world. And yes, those idiots who are firing the rockets are going to fire from where they are. They're in the middle of the city. And they're not going to go get bombed in the middle of the open area. They shouldn't be firing them in the first place. But of course they're going to fire from there. And yes, they endanger their own civilians. And yes, I can't stand that. But it doesn't give you a justification to kill hundreds of Palestinians in what is collective punishment. Okay. To give you a sense of that, the Associated Press reports Israeli airstrikes pounded targets in Gaza, with one hitting a center for the disabled and killing 2 patients and wounding 4 people. Of course, all Palestinians. In a second attack on Saturday night, an Israeli warplane flattened the home of a Gaza police chief, Taisir al-Bash, and damaged a nearby mosque as evening prayers ended, killing at least 18 people and wounding 50, officials said. Now, just flip it every time. If you think you're fair and you're not looking at this from a biased perspective, just flip it and see if you're comfortable with it. Hamas fired a rocket and killed an Israeli police chief and bombed a temple and killed 18 people inside. Now, how much would you be screaming, bloody terrorists! Terrorists! Israel does it. Well, I mean, come on. They had these rockets getting fired at them. At some point, after a bunch of hostilities and a 47-year occupation, they had to go flatten everything in the area. And if 18 people die in civilian areas, in that case, and 175 people overall, 77% of them civilians, hey, man, collateral damage. We're trying our best here. You know what would be trying your best? Ending the occupation. That would be trying your best. Critics say Israel's heavy bombardment of one of the most densely populated territories in the world is itself the main factor putting civilians at risk. Sarit Mikhaili of the Israeli human rights group B'Tselem said that while using human shields violates international humanitarian law, this does not give Israel the excuse to violate international humanitarian law as well. So now let's take a look at those rockets. So here are the Israeli rockets that are being fired. They are significant, and that's what they're fired from. Seems like they've got some pretty good technology bought from the United States of America, and oftentimes just given by the United States of America. They've got helicopters that fire missiles. They've got jets that fire missiles. They've got significant missiles left and right. Now let's take a look at the Qassam rockets that Hamas uses. They're real, they're rockets, and if they land on you, obviously you could die, and some have died in different hostilities, not in this one. And look at that, that obviously looks scary, and you see them being fired. But they are far, far smaller. They're very inaccurate, thank God for that. And now they're also being knocked out of the sky by Iron Dome, which is great. I'm glad that they have Iron Dome in Israel to protect the civilians. It'd be nice if Palestine also had an Iron Dome, which of course would be considered unacceptable. We must only protect the civilians on one side. But let's show you some damage. Look, the Qassam rockets cause damage too. That's in Israel. You see that? If it lands right on the car, obviously that blew up the car there, and then we've got more damage. And so this is not insignificant. You wouldn't want to live in an area where these rockets might land on you. Netanyahu's right about that, right? So we got some damage here on Israel. One more. So they don't often land on houses or buildings or people or cars, but when they do, obviously they could do damage, and you'd be scared of it too. Now let me show you what happens when Israeli missiles land in the Gaza Strip. That damage seems to be a little bit more significant. It doesn't just take out a part of a building or part of a car, it takes out half a city block, okay? Those are good old made in the USA missiles. When they land on you, well, not only are you dead, but probably your family is, and several neighbors nearby, and maybe half your city block. And this goes on and on and on, because these missiles are fairly accurate, and they, unlike the Qassam rockets, land exactly where they're intended to land, which is right in the middle of your neighborhood. Okay, so more updates. Since these rockets are being fired in the Gaza Strip and they're killing all these folks, of course, people are running to shelters. In fact, 17,000 people from northern Gaza have sought refuge in UN shelters. Jamal al-Attar, who's one of the people who took his family in the middle of the night, literally in midnight, ran from the buildings. They were afraid were going to get bombed. went to the UN shelter, says, we complain to God first, and then the United Nations second. I would flip that order, and for the people who don't like the United Nations, well, thank God the United Nations is at least there to provide some sort of shelter. That shelter doesn't always work, as we've seen in previous altercations in the occupied territories, but at least they're there to protect some people now. In fact, they've converted their schools. They take out all the chairs, as you'll see in this picture, from the classrooms, and use the classrooms as shelter for the refugees. Mohammed Sultan says, my son was so scared, his young son, he covers his ears and yells whenever there are bombings. My daughter shakes. You know, I got young kids, and kids being what they are, they're scared of monsters in the night. But I assure them every night, don't worry, there are no monsters. We live in Los Angeles. There's bear's not going to get you. There's no snakes or lions or any of that. Don't worry. If you live in the Gaza Strip, what are you going to tell your kids? You're going to tell them not to worry? No, you're going to tell them to run in the middle of the night. Because there are things that go bump in the night. Sometimes they land in your house and kill your entire family. Violence is wrong. It's wrong on all sides.